This is Michael Govier from the Is It Safe podcast, and you are now clear for communication with Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 237, Lethal Weapon Movie Review. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. It's been a few weeks, but last time out we held our final pop culture fantasy draft of the 1980s. We wrapped up the decade with a draft of the year 1987. So Derek and I each chose a team of 3 movies, 3 TV shows, 3 songs, and 1 personal pick, and we sent the lists off to our judges. They've rendered a verdict. And then we each also get to pick 1 movie from our draft year for us to rewatch and review. It was my turn to start. So I decided that I'd review, or we would watch and review 1987's Lethal Weapon. But before we get to all of that, Derek, what pop culture have you been able to get into in the past couple of weeks? And more importantly, what can you educate me on this week, Derek?
All right. So I have had a lot of time because I think it's been almost 3 or 4 weeks since we've done a new show. So I have a ridiculous amount of stuff. And if I go through it all in a great level of detail, this show is going to run 7 hours. So I'm going to do speed round for a bunch of it, especially the newer stuff that people are probably familiar with. I'll just sort of check the box and move on. But then there are a handful of things I do want to dive into. And you'll be glad to know there are a couple of documentaries which we'll cover at the end. Nice. All right. Let me start with TV. Okay. So I've had a chance to check out a couple of new shows, a couple of new series. Okay. First one was dropped on Netflix a couple of weeks back, Big Mouth season 6. Chris, I believe you started watching this.
Yeah, I want to say that you got me onto it for the podcast here, and I watched maybe like 2 seasons of it. My wife didn't like it very much, but I liked it. I thought it was really good. I love the voice work in it. The writing in it is good. It's kind of crude, but it's very quite crude. Funny. That's a good show. I like it. It's
really strong. So season 6 dropped. In my opinion, it's every bit as good as the seasons that came before it. So if you're a fan of Big Mouth and you haven't already checked out season 6, go ahead and do so. I strongly encourage you to do that. They did a spin-off of Big Mouth. I believe it's called Human Resources. Between seasons 5 and season 6 of Big Mouth, you would be doing yourself a favor to watch that spin-off series before coming into season 6 of Big Mouth, just because there's a lot of stuff that is carried through. You don't need to watch it, but you might feel a little lost on a few of the story threads if you don't. But anyway, it was very strong. I really enjoyed it. And it's been out probably 3 or 4 weeks now, so I assume a lot of our listeners have already watched it. The latest season of The Crown dropped, season 5. I had a chance to watch that. I really enjoyed it. I thought the first 2 or 3 episodes were not that strong, but I felt the sort of, as the series went on, the episodes got a lot stronger. And even though it covered a period of time with the royals from like the mid to late 80s to the mid 90s, and although I was aware of pop culture and current events at those times, I was at university, so I didn't really watch a lot of news. So a lot of the stuff that they talked about in those episodes were completely new to me, which I found very interesting and entertaining at the same time. I know they're not a perfect retelling of history, but I'm watching this to be entertained, and I was really entertained. So if you've watched the previous seasons of The Crown, you'll probably enjoy season 5. I know I did. Check it out. It's on Netflix. Then we move into movies. Chris, have you had a chance to watch the Weird Al Yankovic movie?
I have not. It's on one of the streaming services, though, I heard.
It's on Roku. So it's called Weird, the Al Yankovic story. And
the guy from Harry Potter is him.
Yeah, Harry Potter plays Weird Al. It was great. I loved it. Now, I'm a big fan of Weird Al's music. I do know a fair bit about his professional life. And so I wasn't really sure what to expect with this movie, partly because, as you know, I don't generally watch trailers. So I didn't know what I was in for. it sort of took me a little by surprise to see sort of how it came together, but I felt it was really good. I don't really want to spoil it for people who haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but it was definitely worth the watch. And if you are listening to this podcast, you probably enjoy 80s and 90s pop culture. I would say give it a go, but you got to give it at least 30 minutes because you may not really be digging how it begins, but I guarantee you're going to enjoy the payoff. So check it out. Weird, the Al Yankovic story. I give it a solid A, 2 thumbs up from me. Now I'm going to run through speed round. Here's a bunch of stuff that I watched that is newer. I don't have to dwell on it, but just, people like to know what I'm watching. When Harry Met Sally, another movie we've done on this podcast recently this year, was on again. My wife and I were like, hey, look what's coming up next when Harry Met Sally. I'm like, well, why don't we just watch the beginning part? And again, we sat down and we watched the whole 2 hours. So again, a strong movie. We were happy to sit down and watch a second time. Well, not even a second time, a 20th time. So that was fun. I had a chance to be a guest host on the Cinema 9 podcast a couple of weeks back, and we did The Truman Show with Jim Carrey from the mid-90s. That was my pick. So obviously I had to watch that in preparation for their podcast. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to the Cinema 9 podcast, you should check it out. As if you want, you should start with my episode about The Truman Show from a couple of weeks back. Again, Truman Show, great movie. Loved revisiting it and had a great time discussing it with the good guys over at Cinema 9 podcast. So again, I won't go into that too much here, but if you have a chance, check out The Truman Show if you haven't seen it in a while, and check out our podcast over at Cinema 9 where we review it. Then I watched a couple of older, quote unquote, older movies. I watched a movie from, I think it was 1991, starring Scott Bakula of Quantum Leap fame, called Necessary Roughness.
Oh, Chris, I remember that one. I never saw it, but it was like football or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. So they'd put out Major League in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. And then Necessary Roughness was basically supposed to be like a football version of that, college football, where they had all these misfits came together. Even the logo for the movie was like this football with a face, sort of just like how the Major League one was a play on the Cleveland Indians logo. Mm-hmm. It's sort of similar to that. Like it was the same production company, and they sort of went, hey, we have this other movie. Why don't we just copy it? It was okay, but it was kind of fun to revisit it. I hadn't seen it in at least 20 years. There was a lot of people in that movie that went on to do a lot of better things or were big when they were in that movie. And you're like, why is this person in this movie? Like they were clearly offered a ridiculous amount of money to just make an appearance. So again, a movie I hadn't seen in a long, long time is kind of fun to revisit. And then brand new, we went into the theater and we saw the latest offering from Marvel Cinematic Universe, Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Chris, I'm sure you have not seen this. No. Have you even watched Black Panther?
No.
Oh my God.
The only Marvel stuff I watch is whatever you make me watch for this podcast.
Okay, well, we'll have you watch Black Panther in the not too distant future. But this sequel was pretty decent. The last few movies from Marvel have not really wowed me that much, but this one was pretty good. I had high expectations, as so many people did. I felt it met most of them. It's really long. It's like 2 hours and 40 minutes. I think it probably could have been pared back a little bit. Especially, I think, on a rewatch, some of the scenes and some of the sequences, you're going to be like, I remember this from the first time. You're going to just fast forward through them. But there's a lot to like about this movie. It is Marvel. I don't want to say at its best, but it is definitely one of the better Marvel offerings in the last couple of years. So definitely worth it. If you have a chance to see it in the theater, by all means, check it out. I will say, normally at the end of the Marvel movies, they have a little teaser for what's coming next. There is no teaser at the very end of this movie. There's like a mid-credits sequence and then a whole bunch of credits with nothing at the end. So don't sit through all the credits if you go see it in the theater. You'll be disappointed there's nothing at the end. Then, Chris, I had a chance on Turner Classic Movies to watch The Marx Brothers in A Night at the Opera.
Nice. I've been telling you to watch that movie. What'd you think?
I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. It to me, it reminded me of basically like how like a Saturday Night Live movie kind of works in the best possible ways, though, where it's like it almost felt like they put together a handful of sketches and went, this sketch will work great. It's a 5-minute sequence where it's just great from start to finish. And then they weaved a movie around these sequences. And the movie was good, but the sequences were amazing. And so I mean, I'm glad I watched it. I don't necessarily know if it's the kind of movie I would want to watch again, but it was good. I enjoyed it. I mean, I assume you've seen it.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I remember I recommended it when we talked about musicals. The opera scenes in it, not great. It just used to tie the movie together, and like you said, it just ties together all these sort of sketches. But like the scene when they're in Groucho's stateroom on the ship,
that was the best scene for sure.
It's so funny. And then I also like the scene when him and Chico are talking about the contract that they're going to do for the singer. Or they're ripping parts of it off.
They're ripping the parts of the contract.
It's just so funny.
And then there's a callback to that gag later in the movie. It's just the parts that work very, very well, and you can really see that they're at the top of their game in some parts of this movie, and you can really get a sense of. They came out in the mid 1930s.
Oh, I was like 1935 maybe.
Yeah. So you got to think in the time when this came out, there was probably not a lot of other movies available. So like you can really get a sense of in a field where there's not that much out there, like these guys were doing radical things in a way that had never been done before and that has been copied for 100 years since then. So
absolutely,
it was quite strong. And then I've got 2 documentaries for you.
Oh, nice. We haven't been able to play this for a while, but here it goes.
For 40 days and 40 nights, he watches documentaries. He likes to learn about the world. It's Derek's Documentaries. Derek's Documentaries.
That reminds me, too, I got to write a new song at some point. Not to replace that one, but like I got to write some more songs. I've been lax in the song.
Maybe in the new year, I can get a couple of songs.
You've been teasing that for years, and you haven't done a damn thing yet. So we'll see.
We'll see.
All right. So what documentaries did you watch?
2 documentaries. The first one is as Canadian as they come.
Oh, nice.
It was a documentary about the Canadian band Doug and the Slugs, and the documentary is called Doug and the Slugs and Me.
Oh.
And so for our American listeners and Canadian listeners who are very young, in the mid 80s and early 90s, there was a Canadian band called Doug and the Slugs, and they had a handful of hits, and their songs are pretty catchy and pretty memorable. And believe me, if you've heard them, you'll remember them.
Was that the one? I have a question. Was that the one where the lead singer had the bandages all over his face, or was that Mott the Hoople?
That was not Doug and the Slugs, as far as I know. So it must have been something else.
But Doug and the Slugs had like making it work, making it a little longer, making it work. Yeah, they were great.
They had like, believe me, if you look up their greatest hits and you can have a chance to sample them, you're gonna be like, oh, I know that song. Oh, I know that song. Like, believe me, they were number one across the board. Yeah. Very catchy songs, and their videos were good too. And so the documentary, the documentary was made by the best friend of one of Doug and the Slugs' daughters. So the main lead singer of the band who wrote all the songs and actually directed all the videos, his first name is Doug, hence the Doug and the Slugs. He had, I think, 3 daughters, and one of his daughters, her best friend who lived next door, like basically grew up together. And so the friend had this front row seat of this family where the lead singer of Doug and the Slugs was just a dad as far as she knew. And then years later, she's become a movie director. And so she did this documentary. She reached out to her childhood friend and said, like, I want to do this documentary about your dad and his music career and all that. So it's not just a look back and a retrospective of this Canadian music star. It's done from the point of view of someone who genuinely actually knew him and lived the life and saw him every day for years and years and years. So it has a very personal touch to it. It was actually a really good documentary, very heartwarming, tugs on your heartstrings, because the lead singer for Doug and the Slugs passed away a number of years ago. And so it's this retrospective where they interview the family and the friends and the daughters, and they read through his journals, and it's quite good. And I learned a lot about the band itself, and it was a chance to sort of revisit some of that music. So it was quite good. I saw it on the documentary channel here in Canada. It's called Doug and the Slugs and Me. So if you have a chance, check it out. It was pretty good. And then the other one is a documentary series that dropped on Netflix just this week, 4 40-minute episodes. It's called Pepsi, Where's My Jet? And for those who may or may not remember, in the mid-1990s, Pepsi put out a contest where if you drank a whole bunch of Pepsi, you would earn Pepsi points, and then you could cash in the Pepsi points for free stuff, encouraging you to drink more Pepsi so you could get better stuff from their catalog. Well, in the commercial, there's a kid who drinks all the Pepsi, he gets all the cool stuff, and then he flies a Harrier jet to school, and he says something like, hey, it sure beats taking the bus. And in the commercial, they say, for 7 million Pepsi points, you can get a Harrier jet. And it's clearly a joke, but there's no legal disclaimer in the ad. So a guy basically watches it and says, A Harrier jet is worth $30 million. I can get 7 million Pepsi points for way less than $30 million. I'm doing this. And so the documentary is about this guy's challenge to Pepsi, where he basically says, I have met all the requirements to earn these 7 million Pepsi points. I want a Harrier jet. And Pepsi, of course, says, we're not doing that. And then there's this legal battle and there's this court of public opinion and all the rest of it. It was fantastic. It was so entertaining and so good. And honestly, even though I lived through it, I didn't remember the outcome of this thing. And so you watch this thing through. It was great. It was fantastic. It was very entertaining. And as a Coke guy, nothing made me happier than seeing Pepsi sort of, be made a fool of in this documentary. So, yeah, check it out. Pepsi, Where's My Jet? 4 40-minute episodes. You'll be glad you can do it in one sitting in one night. It's great. So check it out. Anyway, was supposed to be speed round. It took 20 minutes. That's a whole long list of all the things I watched over the last 3 or 4 weeks. What about you, Chris? Did you watch one single thing other than The Love Boat or Happy Days or WKRP?
Sort of. Well, what I did was I took my family to Great Wolf Lodge. That's one of the reasons why we weren't able to do the show. And so I'm at Great Wolf Lodge. And the reason why I mention that is because, we're at the water park all day. And then after that, we get back to the room and everybody's like tired, right? So they go to sleep. So I'm up by myself. And so I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do? I decide I'm going to spend my time doing what I do best, watching an old movie. So I watched Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins.
Nice.
Oh, it was on the Tubi app. I love that movie. Oh man.
Nice.
It's so pretentious though. The Adventure Begins. They didn't make any more after that. And then when we got home from Great Wolf Lodge, we get unpacked and I'm like kind of laying around and I flick around the TV and Meatballs was on. So naturally I watched it again.
Of course.
And then I watched Lethal Weapon for the podcast. That was 2 nights ago. And then last night I watched On Golden Pond. So basically, as far as my experience with pop culture goes this week, literally nothing has changed since 1985.
Of course not.
That's just kind of the way it is. Oh, and I also got this for you.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
I decided to go with a music-related dad joke.
Oh, okay.
Something a little bit different, all right? So, Derek, how do you tell how heavy a red hot chili pepper is?
Oh, geez. As a fan of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, I know I'm going to regret the punchline, but I have no idea, Chris. How?
Give it away, give it away, give it away, give it away now.
Yeah, I was right. I regret that.
Give it away. That's nothing but pure and simple communism.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Hal Needham's futuristic masterpiece, Megaforce.
With Chuck Norris?
No, Barry Bostwick and Michael Beck did all the heavy lifting in that one.
I'm glad that happened to that guy. F him.
I'm gonna barbecue your ass in molasses.
Thank you.
The Southern NASCAR demographic.
It's full of bigotry. It's full of racism. It's full of sexism.
There's no way you came from my loins.
Hey, how cool is this?
What in the hell is this world coming to? So Derek, we made it through the entire decade of the 1980s. We did a pop culture fantasy draft for each year of that decade. And like any good fantasy draft, it's a competition, right? So after doing 9 years of the draft, I was up 5-4. So it all comes down to our last year, which was 1987. So if you win, we end the decade on a tie. But if I win, I get to take home the prize of the best pop culture fantasy drafts, the winner of the decade, right? So we drafted our teams. We sent off our lists to our esteemed panel of judges. And by the way, I just wanted to give a shout out to our judges. They had a tough job to do, picking the winners every year. And I would also just like to point out that I've shown the judges nothing but admiration and respect since day one, as you know.
Jeez. I think you need to bleep that part out. That is so not true.
I've always been kind to them. I never say bad things about them. But anyway, so we sent off our final draft list from 1987, and the judges have spoken. This is going to decide it all. It's either a tie if you win, or it's a clean win for me if I win. But the good news is no matter how it winds up, you will not gain the possession of the trophy, the Funko Fonzie. So that's the one good thing. So we got a panel of 9 judges. And let me tell you, it was a close vote. The final tally was 5-4 for the winner. Okay, here we go. The winner of the 1987 Pop Culture Fantasy Draft.
The winner is Chris.
I just want to say I take back everything that I ever said negatively about the judges.
Well, the better man has won. Congratulations. You mastered the draft.
Yeah, so the draft
as I've said before, I really flubbed the first couple of drafts, sort of misunderstanding how this would work, but you had your finger on the pulse right from day one, and you just jumped right in there, took an early lead, and it is hard to come back when you were in a 3-1 or a 4-1 deficit. So,
well, you did good. You really battled back, but it was a lot of fun doing that. So we'll have to find something new to do in the new year, that's for sure. But what we also do then is after we hold our draft, as you know, we go back and forth. We each pick one movie from our draft here for us to watch, rewatch, and review and talk about here on the show. So I started things off, and I went with Lethal Weapon from 1987. So Derek, you want to give us maybe just a quick overview? It's been 30 years, over 30 years. Have you watched it since then, by the way? Like any time recently before watching it this week?
I would say it's probably been at least 5 years, probably somewhere between 5 and 10 years since I have watched this movie in its entirety. But it was funny when I own the DVD of Lethal Weapon. When Lethal Weapon 4 came out, they put out a 4-disc box set, and I thought, I'm buying that, and I did. And so when I went to watch the movie this week, I was like, well, I don't need to watch it on streamer. I have the DVD and I will watch some of the special features. And I'm looking for the movie, and I find the box set, and there's parts 2 and part 3. Where the heck is part 1? Looking. I finally realized we have a stack of Christmas movies off to one side. And sure enough, I have Lethal Weapon in that pile. And I'm like, oh yeah, I put it in with the Christmas movies. Yet I hadn't watched it over Christmas in quite some time. So, yeah, it's been at least 5 to 10 years since we watched it. And probably the last time I watched it was around Christmas time, which is why it was in the pile with all the Christmas movies.
Okay, so we'll come back to that in a second. But
yep.
We usually like to start things off with the box office from 1987. Any guesses as to what movie was number 1 at the box office in 1987? It wasn't Lethal Weapon.
No, I honestly, I'll be honest. I cheated. I just today re-listened to our 87 draft, and we talked about that in that. So I only know because I just listened to it that it was 3 Men and a Baby.
No, it was actually Beverly Hills Cop Part 2.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. I thought it was 3 Men and a Baby.
And then Platoon, Fatal Attraction, The Untouchables, and then 3 Men and a Baby. 3 Men and a Baby did gross, like it was the highest grossing film, but in that year it only grossed 70.
Oh, okay. That's why
because it came out in late November. So that was the only thing.
Right.
So if you look at movies that actually were released in that year, it was. But in the year 1987, Beverly Hills Cop Part 2 was number 1. A Lethal Weapon finished 8th. So the other thing too is what's that?
Quite respectable.
Oh yeah, it did very good. Made $65 million. Now I always like to look at some of the more obscure titles from each year. So if you go all the way down to the bottom of the box office chart in 1987, the lowest grossing movie of the year took in a grand total of $410,000, placing 200th out of 200 theatrical releases that year. The movie was called Number One with a Bullet. Apparently it's another cop buddy movie, but this one, Number One with a Bullet, stars the dynamic duo of Robert Carradine and Billy D. Williams.
Nice.
Robert Carradine. He was Louis Skolnick in Revenge of the Nerds. So nice. I can't imagine why having Louis from Revenge of the Nerds paired up with Lando Calrissian wouldn't be box office gold. Go figure. But it
surprises you sometimes how these things work out.
Yeah. But like I said, Lethal Weapon did good. Finished 8th at $65 million. But you got to admit, like 1987 was not a great year for big movies. Like there was no single like huge box office giant. Like the years leading up to this, remember you had like Ghostbusters or Back to the Future, like something that just dominated the box office. Right. But this year didn't have it. But Lethal Weapon was released on March the 6th, 1987, directed by Richard Donner, and it starred Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. It was produced on a budget of $15 million. It made a little over $65 million at the box office, but it took in $120 million in worldwide grosses. So it was a big hit. And we always talk about how these older movies hold up. So before I ask you, if you think this movie held up, let's just address the elephant in the room. Okay. And let's be honest. It's a great big homophobic, anti-Semitic, misogynistic, racist elephant, Mel Gibson. There was a time when Mel Gibson was one of the biggest movie stars, in the world.
Yeah.
And although he was born just outside of New York, he's American, but he studied theater in Sydney, Australia. So he started out doing, small Australian films. Like he was in like Tim and Gallipoli and Mad Max. In 1985, Time magazine named their first ever sexiest man alive. Guess who? Mel Gibson. Mm-hmm. So now I know he's battled alcoholism his whole life. And although some of his more offensive rantings have come when he's been arrested, for being, intoxicated in public, like that's never an excuse to me. God knows I've had too much to drink on a number of occasions in my life, but I've never gone off on any misogynistic, racist rants. So anyway, based on everything that we know about Mel Gibson, what was it like for you going back and watching him in, what I think most people would say is his most famous role?
Yeah,
did it come into play for you, I guess?
Not initially. Again, it's like you say, it's like sort of the elephant in the room. I watched the movie. My wife and I actually watched together. We watched the movie, and once you dive into it and you just watch it as a piece of entertainment, you sort of strip away the real life of it all, because it's not Mel Gibson that's shooting the gun. It's Martin Riggs that's shooting the gun. So you lose yourself in the characters. You lose yourself in the story. But both before you hit play and after you hit eject, you sort of think, man, this movie is a great movie. It's too bad Mel Gibson screwed things up by being who he is and saying what he said and doing what he did years later. Now, that's not to say that he wasn't secretly like that all along. I don't know. He probably was. Who are we kidding? But in the moment when this came out, this thing was amazing. Like, it spawned 3 sequels. And like you said, like between this and Braveheart, and Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson was the man for a long time. And then he did what he did and he said what he said. And now you're like, can we ever watch what he did in the past and sort of not think about that? And it's like, I tried not to for 2 hours, and I tried to enjoy the movie, and I think I did, but it was still there at some level.
Yeah, it's like when we had Keanu Cruz on, we were talking about TV dads, and we were talking about Cosby and how you've got to, can you separate the artist from the art? Sometimes it's a tough one. It always kills me how Hollywood is always so willing to whitewash all this crap. Mm-hmm. Like Mel Gibson was basically blacklisted in Hollywood for about 10 years there, but Hollywood loves a comeback. And then it was around 2014, a whole bunch of people in Hollywood, they're like, well, maybe we should forgive this guy. And then he goes and makes Hacksaw Ridge, and it gets 6 Oscar nominations.
It was really good.
It's like Mel Gibson's okay again. I don't know. So he's an interesting guy.
Well, like so many other things in the world, it comes down often, unfortunately, to just the dollars and cents of it. They're like, He can make a movie that'll make money, so people are willing to turn a blind eye to some of the things that have been problematic. And we were just watching last week tonight with John Oliver. The season finale was on this past week, and he made a crack about Mel Gibson, and he said Mel Gibson made 7 Hollywood movies this past year. 7. What does that tell you about a guy who at one point was like, he'll never work again? Not only is he working, he made 7 movies this year. Come on. So clearly a lot of people have been able to forgive his past inappropriate discussions, his indiscretions, and sort of went, yeah, well, that's what he used to be like, but he can make me money. Let's give him some money and let him make a movie. So
it's funny because the flip side of this is his co-star, Danny Glover, who is like the opposite, he's very likable and Danny Glover might be one of the most underrated actors of his generation, in my opinion.
Oh, I agree. Yeah,
I think fantastic. If you look at if there's an award out there, there's a good chance Danny Glover's been nominated for it. And funny enough, though, he's never been nominated for an Oscar, although he did win the humanitarian Oscar last year. Rightly so. But he's been nominated for a Screen Actors Guild Award. He's been nominated for Image Awards and Film Critics Awards. And he's this accomplished actor in stage and screen, and he has worked steadily over the years. Every single year since 1981, Danny Glover has had multiple movie projects. He's been in a ton of stuff. But I think he's underrated because mostly everyone knows him for Lethal Weapon. There was The Color Purple and Witness. Man, he was great in those movies. And I really love how here in Lethal Weapon, he's like this incredibly likable guy. And in Witness, he's just about as scary and as evil as you can get. He's a great actor. But I think he's really, really underappreciated by mass audiences. That's what I think.
Yeah. He was really good. He had a very small part in the movie The Royal Tenenbaums. The Wes Anderson movie. Yeah. Again, it was a huge ensemble cast with so many big names, and he was just one of the many names in it. And again, small part, very important to the movie, killed it. And you sort of just forget sometimes that how good he really is.
And not to be outdone by Mel Gibson, there's another crackpot weirdo in this cast, and that's Gary Busey. No.
You know it.
No,
he's never looked better than he did in this movie. And my God, he probably watches this every night and goes, I wish I still looked like that.
Well, a lot of his issues can be directly attributed to his motorcycle accident that he had in 1988, but he's a weird guy.
Yeah,
but I think one thing that gets overlooked with Busey a bit is this is a guy that was an incredibly talented actor before he had that crash. If you look at Milius's Big Wednesday and the Buddy Holly story, both were back in 78. He was a really good actor. Mm-hmm. He was nominated for an Oscar for the Buddy Holly story. He won the National Society of Film Critics Award for Buddy Holly. And now I guess he was in DC Cab. Not a career.
Which I liked. I like that. I've been looking for it on the streamers, and it's not available.
You'll never find it
as soon as it pops back up, I'm watching it.
I think that movie just kind of disappeared. But, like I say, probably not a career highlight for the guy. But you could probably say that for anyone that was, had any part to do with that movie. But I will say that, Gary Busey was awesome in this movie as Mr. Joshua. He was amazing.
He was really good.
God, he was good in this movie. And I love how toward the end of the movie, the head bad guy dies first.
Yeah.
So Gary Busey, even though he's like the henchman, he lives. He's the final fight that Mel Gibson has to overcome to become the hero. So even though he's not like the top bad guy, he's the real bad guy in this movie. And they really drive this point home during the climax because he kills 2 cops on his way to Murtaugh's home to try and kill his family. He was great in this movie. God, he was just such a good bad guy. And that scene with the lighter where he puts his arm over God, he was great. I have a couple other members of the cast I want to talk about. Tom Atkins. He played Michael Hunsaker. This guy was a bit of a horror movie staple there for a while back in the 80s. I don't know if you remember. He was in The Howling and The Fog, and he was in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch.
I never saw any of those movies. I'd never seen this guy before or since this movie.
He had a small part in Escape from New York. You had me watch that for the podcast last year.
Honestly, I don't know. He didn't make an impression on me. I don't remember.
I thought he was really well cast as Hunsaker. I thought
he did a good job as Hunsaker. Yeah.
And speaking of Hunsaker, Jackie Swanson, who played Amanda Hunsaker, the daughter. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you recognize her, but she was Woody's girlfriend in Cheers.
I didn't recognize her from that, but I did recognize her from other. I recognized her, but honestly, I couldn't put my finger on it.
Yeah, she was Woody's girlfriend. Remember when he wrote that song for her? Kelly, 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 Kelly. Why? Because I love you. I recognized her right away, and I remembered that. So I thought, but I want to give a couple more quick shout outs from the cast. Mitchell Ryan, he was the top bad guy. I think they called him the General or something whatever he was.
Yeah, he was the bad guy
I recognized him. He was the big boss in the law firm in Liar Liar. You ever seen?
Oh yeah, he totally was. No,
Remember,
no,
he was. Yeah,
No,
he was in
wasn't
that
him.
scene when Jim Carrey goes into the boardroom and makes fun of everybody.
Oh,
and he just
yes,
starts
yes.
bursting out laughing.
Yes.
That's where I recognized him from.
Sorry, I thought you meant the guy that he was in court against. I'm like, no, that was the guy from Alien Nation. No.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yeah, he was the big boss. Yeah.
Other guy I want to give a shout out to is Grand Bush. He's got a real small part in this. He's always had small parts, but he was one of the cops in the precinct. He was also in Stir Crazy, which is a personal favorite of mine. He was Slowpoke in that movie. And he was in Die Hard. He was Little Johnson. Remember, there was him and Robert Dodge.
Oh, yeah.
Little Johnson
He's the
Big
guy at the beginning of Lethal Weapon where he's like, where the captain comes by and says,
Yes.
Roger, I liked you better with the beard. And then he goes, oh, yeah, the beard. And then he's like, yeah, some detective. That's the guy, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
and then Mary Ellen Trainor. She was a psychiatrist. She was Mrs. Walsh in The Goonies. I don't know if you
She was
remember
also in Die Hard as a psychologist as well. Die
that.
Hard
I
3.
believe that she was. Yes.
Yeah.
And then I want to say last, but certainly not least, Al Leong, the ultimate 80s Asian henchman.
Yep. He's a that guy for sure.
God, he's so good. He was the guy.
Also in Die Hard.
He was in Die Hard, and he was the guy that tortured Mel Gibson with the car battery jumper cables there. Like I say, he not only Die Hard, he's been in a few other movies that we've done on this podcast. He was in Big Trouble in Little China, and then this movie, Die Hard, and They Live. He was in briefly.
Yes. Yeah, small part in that one.
Let me tell you, back in the 80s, if you needed an Asian henchman in your movie, you called in Al Leong.
He was the top of the list. Yep.
We want to talk a little bit about the director, Richard Donner. Richard Donner was an interesting guy because he was kind of like this one-stop shop as far as directors go. Like, he could do everything. He could direct, produce, edit. He cut his teeth back in the 60s in TV. So I think he pretty much learned how to do everything, when it came to producing, projects in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. But just a quick list of films that he's directed: The Omen, Superman, The Goonies, Scrooged, and then Lethal Weapon. One of the most financially successful directors of all time.
Oh, for sure.
Where do you think Lethal Weapon ranks in his body of work, Derek? Because he's done a lot.
Honestly, I think it's either his number one or his number two. It depends on if Scrooged has had more staying power because of its annual recycling because it's a Christmas movie, and depending on how it's done financially. I got to think Lethal Weapons is number one, with Scrooge being a very, very close number two, and then probably the Superman franchise. He did Superman 1 and 2. Probably a
sort of. He
maybe
did Superman.
The Goonies.
Yeah, The Goonies was just such a Gen X staple for me, but I thought Superman might be his best movie. Like, I thought he did a really good job. Superman 2
in the moment for sure. The whole thing of believe a man can fly, what he did in the late 70s,
first comic book movie
Superman.
ever.
Oh yeah, you can't understate that. But looking back now, with the context you have of where the Marvel movies have brought superhero movies, you don't appreciate just how good it was, how good what he was doing actually was when it came out, how groundbreaking, how revolutionary. Like, you watch it now and you're like, hey, look, Christopher Reeves is Superman. You can see the sweat under his armpits. Like, it's those little details where you're like, oh, that doesn't hold up. But in the moment, nobody cared. It's like, oh my God, he can fly. Look, I believe he can fly. So.
Now, before we get into this movie itself, I have a question for you. Is Lethal Weapon a Christmas movie? We have this debate all the time about whether or not Die Hard is a Christmas movie. But what about Lethal Weapon, Derek? What do you think?
Yeah, so I talked about this earlier, and upon watching it just this week, I would probably say no, this is not a Christmas movie, even though part of the movie, it takes place clearly around the Christmas season. There's Christmas decorations. There's a scene where he goes in the Christmas trees, and I don't know. My wife and I talked about this after we just watched it this week, and we sort of went, I don't really think that's as Christmassy as, say, Die Hard, that takes place all in one night on Christmas Eve. But so this one, I'm going to say no, but Die Hard, I'm definitely going to keep saying yes.
It's interesting because my wife chimed in on this one, and she's like, this is more of a Christmas movie than Die Hard is. I was like, really? That's interesting.
Funny that she and I are the exact opposite on that.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of interesting. Keep in mind, I've been getting my wife to watch Die Hard with me every Christmas, for years. And she, like I say, watched this one with me. But yeah, I don't know. I hadn't seen this movie in about 30 years.
Wow.
I always remembered that it took place at Christmas, and I seem to remember Jingle Bell Rock was in it, but that was about it. Like, I didn't really associate it with Christmas overall, but I think it is a Christmas movie because Christmas is the thing that kind of ties it all together. And I guess you could argue that, you know, Christmas is a time for some people to be very reflective and things like that. And it really kind of ties this movie together. So,
yeah, I think the elements of the fact this movie takes place at Christmas, if this movie just took place in the summer around a July 4th weekend, I don't think it would hit the same notes. So I think the fact that it takes place at Christmas is important to the story, but I don't know if I would call it a capital C Christmas movie. But again, I'm not going to fight you on that one. That's a conversation. It's like, you know, if you want to call it a Christmas movie, fine, I'm okay with that. So but if you're telling me Die Hard is not a Christmas movie, I will fight you on that one. And okay,
so this movie gets started with these 3D titles. And right away, I was thinking like Richard Donner's going back to his Superman bag of tricks,
right, for this Superman, one,
you know.
Yep.
But it opens up with that helicopter shot of Los Angeles, and it just keeps moving closer and closer to this apartment building, and then it finally closes right in on this open window of the apartment. And of course, since it's a 1980s movie, there just happens to be a naked woman inside the room. It's Kelly from Cheers in the buff, you know. But she stands up and then she jumps off the balcony to her death, which sets up the whole plot for the movie. Danny Glover is known for his catchphrase in this movie, which he says, "I'm too old for this shit." And I think it's a pretty good catchphrase. But he's got an even better line, at least in my opinion. When he finds out that Mel Gibson is his partner, he says, "God hates me." And my wife immediately starts laughing when watching this. I've said that before. So obviously I picked it up from watching this movie, you know, like a zillion times back in the 80s. So I thought that was interesting. So I don't know. I really like that line that he does. And there's a scene early on. I think it's actually when Danny Glover says, "God hates me." Him and Mel Gibson are getting a hot dog on the street and they go and get into a car.
Yep.
And I don't know if I just, cause I was watching it on, like, I've got a big screen TV in my house and I'm watching, there's this car full of extras that are in the lane beside them. And every single person in the car is staring directly at the two actors during the scene. And they just keep staring at them for the whole scene. Now, I am not a Hollywood extra, but I do know that you're supposed to blend in. You know, you're not supposed to be conspicuous looking as an extra. And these extras in this scene suck at doing that. Because it's not like Glover and Gibson are doing anything that would like make anyone look at them.
Right.
You know, they're not shooting anyone. They're not having a big argument or something. They're just getting into their unmarked police car, you know, talking and eating a hot dog. So anyway, that scene really, really jumped out to me. So
when I was watching this, there's a few things that jumped out at me. I'll hit on a couple of them and then we'll go back and forth a bit. The music. This First Lethal Weapon, I mean, it came out in 87 and it's got like this definitely 80s sort of score soundtrack to it where it's like the saxophone. It's like this jazzy, synthy sort of saxophone sound. And that became the trademark of this film franchise. Like I said, they've done 4 of these and that's a big part of it. And so that was one of the things that immediately for me, as soon as I heard that sort of score with the saxophone, I'm like, okay, this is Lethal Weapon. Like it immediately put me into the movie, and it also immediately put me into that late 80s, early 90s sound, just because it's so like tied in my mind to this movie. It's one of those ones like when you hear the Raiders of the Lost Ark theme or the Star Wars theme, it's like you immediately puts you in the place of that movie. Not that I think that this jazzy, synthy saxophone soundtrack is as good as the stuff that John Williams did for those other movies, but I do think that it really helps put you in the moment of this movie. And if you've seen the movie before, it's just that musical cue that's just like bang, you're back into Lethal Weapon. So that to me was a big piece right out of the gate that I'm like, okay, we're watching Lethal Weapon.
I'll tell you something in this movie that'll throw you back to the 80s awful quick, and that's the smoking that goes on. Yeah. And we've mentioned this before. When it comes to these older 80s movies, there's always a lot of smoking going on. But Mel Gibson smokes like continuously in this movie. I recently saw a meme on social media. It's a photo of Mel Gibson smiling and he's having a smoke. He's got the long hair going. And the words underneath the meme are something to the effect of, your mom watching you open Christmas presents in 1985. I don't know. I just chuckled at it.
Pretty much.
Yeah, liked it.
Well,
Okay,
speaking of Mel Gibson, so in the 80s, one of the other things that really jumped out at me for this was his hair. He had that 80s hair.
Oh, yeah.
I had a hard time getting past that. There's a lot of things in this movie that you're like, if this movie was 10 years later, I wouldn't know any different. Like, this would hold up. But the hair is just like, oh my God, it's so 80s. But I mean, it works. It works to help set this movie in a time period. It is of the time. And when it came out, this was how men wore their hair. Like, if you're cool, your hair looked like Mel Gibson's hair. But just looking back at it now, I couldn't help but laugh at some scenes where his hair is just so outrageous. I'm like, wow, that's some big 80s hair, Mel.
It was. I want to talk about some scenes that I think are important in the movie. So the scene with the jumper on the roof. Okay. So Mel Gibson goes up to the roof, tries to talk the guy down, and then he goes out there on the ledge, right? And all the people like below, they're like all freaking out watching out there. And this guy up there, he's like, get away from me. And he threatens to jump, several times. And finally, Mel Gibson just handcuffs himself to the guy.
Yep.
And the idea, he's going to prevent him from jumping because, he'd be pulling Mel Gibson down with him. I think he says at one point, you're going to be killing a cop. Does. So the guy freaks out. The bystanders are all freaking it out. And then Mel threatens to jump and take the guy with him. And the guy gets spooked, right? And then Gibson goes ahead and jumps and pulls the guy over with him. And everyone's freaking out, and they fall down the side of the building in slow motion. And then they land in this big inflatable air pillow.
Yep.
What the hell? Did no one see the goddamn air pillow there? Did they not see the cops below laying out the pillow? Did they not see them blowing it up?
I think it's one of those fake outs. Yeah, it's
so
kind of it's a bait and switch. You're like, hey,
the jumper guy, he would have been like, hey, they're setting up an air pillow down there. I'm going to move, 20 feet down this ledge. So that way, if I actually threaten to jump, it means something, I don't know. I just won't be just jumping into this inflatable air mattress thing. I don't know. That scene was dumb.
My criticism of this, and not that I'm promoting suicide in any way whatsoever, but it's like, that was like a 6-story building. I'm sorry. If you jump off a 6-story building, unless you fall flat on your head and break your neck, you're probably not going to die. You're just going to be very, very, very badly hurt or maimed or crippled. So it's like, that was the one thing I'm watching going, why would he threaten to jump off a 6-story building? That seems like that's not going to get anywhere near the outcome you expect. So anyway, I don't know. That was sort of what went through my mind. I'm like, hey, you're going to do it right. Find a 50-story building.
I love the scene on the bridge when Danny Glover is talking to someone on a quote unquote cell phone.
Yep.
The cell phone is massive.
So I looked this up.
It looks like one of those mobile army phones you see in a World War II documentary or something.
Yeah. The battery for the phone is as big as a car battery. It's massive. And so I was looking this up, and apparently this is the first on-screen use of a mobile phone, a modern mobile phone. And so it's like, oh, okay. I mean, now we look back and you laugh at it as what the hell were they thinking? But in 1987, it's like, what do you mean? Wait, he's on a phone, but he's not in a building? What's up with that?
Yeah, there's no cord attached to a building somewhere. What's going on?
We've talked about a couple of the scenes where Mel Gibson. So part of the plot is is he just crazy? Is he suicidal? Is he crazy and trying to draw what they call a psycho pension? Mm-hmm. And so my wife and I are watching it, and she turns to me about halfway through the movie and she goes, remember back when nobody knew what PTSD was and the fact that you're suffering from this mental illness, nobody really gives a crap. All they can do is make fun of you or talk about how, oh, you're crazy, I don't want to work with you. And it's that wouldn't fly today. It would be clearly both of these guys were in the Vietnam War, and a lot of Vietnam veterans had PTSD and other, mental illness that came from it and other problems. And it's yet that's not addressed at all in this movie, because in the time, addressing it wasn't a thing. They didn't know how to address it. They didn't know what to call it, all the rest of it. But it's clearly you watch it now and you're like, Of course he's trying to kill himself. He's got PTSD between the death of his wife and the things he's done in Vietnam. And it's just like both of these characters clearly have issues that are sort of scratched in this movie, but not really dealt with or addressed in any healthy way. And it's just like, again, just another sort of its time. You know, we talk about, oh, boys will be boys and that kind of thing. You know, a lot of these movies where you're like, it was acceptable at the time. It's like at the time, it was acceptable to just be crazy and be like, well, he's crazy. Just ignore it. It'll go away. It's like, no, he needs help. He needs a professional. So
that's a good
that
point.
stood out to me a lot.
Yeah. I like the scene when they go to the rich villa. You know, there's the girls and the cocaine and they shoot the guy and he goes into the plastic cover in the pool. There is a great shot there when the two of them come up from like under the water in the pool and they're like hanging on the side of the pool. Yes. And there's the Los Angeles skyline in the background. Yes. Really well composed shot. Yeah. I think it's one that people identify when they think of the movie, you know? Because
it's in the trailer. That scene's in the trailer. Because he asked him, he goes, have you ever met someone you haven't killed? And he goes, well, I haven't killed you yet. So it's like a memorable line with the back shot of this greatly composed shot. It's funny, when we watched that scene, I turned to my wife and I said, well, at least they're in Los Angeles, so we know the water of the pool was warm. Because I've fallen into the pool when we opened it in like April and May when it was like 50 degrees. And believe me, that's not a pleasant experience. But if you're in LA, even in the cooler months like December, it's still going to be a pretty warm pool.
The scene when they have dinner at Murtaugh's house and the oldest teenage daughter there obviously has a crush on Mel Gibson. I love when the two little kids start rapping.
Oh my God! Yeah,
the boy is doing like this, like beatboxing, and the girl raps about her sister being in love with Martin. I don't know. I love that scene.
Makes me laugh every time.
Yeah, really, really enjoyed that. And then the scene when Dixie's house blows up, and they go to talk to the little kids about the house blowing up, and they want to know about the guy that was there planting the bomb. And Danny Glover is trying to get information from the one kid.
Yeah. This is Alfred. Look, everybody, it's Alfred.
Everyone, this is Alfred. Because first of all, he says, what's your name? And the other kid goes, don't tell him your name, Alfred. And he's like, oh, okay, it's Alfred. And he's like, how old are you? And the other kid covers his mouth and goes, 6.
Yeah.
Which I thought was funny. And I've always liked how Glover talks to them. And when he's talking about the tattoo. On the guy that planted the bomb, and he's like, "Is it like Popeye?" No, not like Popeye. I don't know why I like it. I just love the way he delivers that line. So
yeah, that was good. I want to say there was so when we watch movies, often if it's a decent movie and it's got good writing, there are often memorable quotes from the movie and things that become a part of our personal lexicon. And one of the things I realized when I watched this movie. Not a movie I expected to have many of those kind of call-outs, but I realized early in the movie, Danny Glover puts on his tie and he goes down to the kitchen and he says to the wife and he's like, what's this spot on my tie? And she goes, that is an ugly spot. My wife and I reference that line all the time. Whenever we're trying to clean something in the house or something's dirty and you go, what's this? And you just go, that is an ugly spot. And I realized that this movie is where we got that from. And I no recollection of that until I actually just watched it again this week. And I'm like, oh my God, that's where we pulled this from. So
it's like me with my God hates me thing.
Yeah, it's like of all the quotes of this movie, that's the one that has stuck with us. And I don't think that the writers had any intention for that to be like a long lasting thing. But it's just funny how you pick up on some little detail in a movie and it's like now it's a part of your ongoing life. So it just made us laugh.
Now that you're mentioning quotes, one thing I liked was, remember when Mr. Joshua shoots Mel Gibson with the shotgun and he like falls down and he's knocked out, but he's wearing the bulletproof vest. I like when he comes to and he's like, you know, he kind of gets his senses about him. Then he's like, oh man, that hurts. And he's like, oh, now I'm pissed. I just love the way that's his reaction. I always thought it was good. One thing I want to mention about this movie too, the station wagon. Okay. The station wagon that Danny Glover drives out in the desert when he goes to get his daughter back from the kidnappers. It's a 1978 Ford LTD Country Squire. And it's got the roof racks on it. When I was growing up as a teenager, my best friend had one of these. And his dad used to call it the magic wagon because sometimes it would come home and grass was growing out of the bottom of it. Sometimes the bumper would magically change shapes. Like, we put that car through its paces, man. We used to go to bush parties and go on tours and all this. So I know it's not cool, but it was the 80s. But I saw that station wagon. I'm like, oh my God, it's the magic wagon. So that was the thing that stood out to me. A couple of things I noticed too. There were a few movie marquees I spotted.
Yes.
In the background of some of the shots, you notice those too. One was The Lost Boys. And it says, like, the hit of the year.
The hit of the year, yeah. And it was also distributed by Warner Brothers, who distributed this film. So that was definitely deliberate.
The other one that stood out to me was Debbie Does Dallas.
I'm not familiar with that particular franchise. Is that about a real estate agent moving to Dallas?
It is. It was from a few years before, probably around the late 70s. You know, this porn film, right? Great final fight scene between Gibson and Busey, I thought. I like how they're both these Special Forces Army guys. So they're like amazing fighters, especially with hand-to-hand combat. Yeah. And in the end, it's the figure 4 leg lock that brings down Gary Busey. I thought that scene was really good.
I mean, in retrospect, watching it, I sort of like, again, my wife and I turned to each other and went, this would never happen today. Like, there's no way. The guy killed 2 police officers. There's no way that all the other cops wouldn't immediately just jump on him or straight up shoot him. You kill cops, bam, you're done.
Well, it was because Danny Glover's character was saying, stop, go back. I'll take responsibility. Just let them go, right? So I guess they were deferring to him. He was an older guy on the force, so they kind of, I guess that was the idea there. And I want to mention, when the credits start to roll, they start to roll with Jingle Bell Rock. And then it's like 5 seconds into the song, and it changes to Lethal Weapon by Honeymoon Suite.
Yeah.
Honeymoon Suite, I've mentioned this before. First of all, they're Canadian.
Yeah, love them.
Such an underrated band, you know.
Definitely.
I mentioned that on the episode that I did with Yancey, with bands that should have been bigger. But their song doesn't even start at the beginning of the credits.
Yeah,
and then
they really got hosed on that one.
Oh, yeah. And then even more so, if you wait till the end of the credits, like I did, they only list 3 songs in the credits that are in the movie. And guess what? Lethal Weapon by Honeymoon Suite ain't one of them.
Really?
They didn't even make the credits. Like, no respect, I tell you. So
that's craziness. Okay, one last thing I want, because obviously we're running a little long here tonight. Murtaugh, the movie that starts with Murtaugh celebrating his 50th birthday.
Yes.
Chris, you're over 50 now.
I am.
Right?
Yes.
And I'm getting close. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I are watching the movie, and we started looking at each other going, does he seem 50 to you? I was like, he seems a hell of a lot older than 50, given what 50-year-olds are like today, for the most part. And then I looked it up in the thing. He was only 40 when he made this movie. He was playing a guy who was 50. And in my mind, he looked like he was 60. So
there is a different perception of age back in the 80s, though. Like,
definitely.
Time,
so,
you know, people that we thought were like young weren't, and people that we thought were older were like, it was just like, I mean, right now I'm the same age as Wilford Brimley was when he made Cocoon. Okay, so I'm Wilford Brimley old. So I mean, I just think our whole perceptions of, you know, age back then was different. So just as a wrap up for this movie, I feel like this movie is sort of more than the sum of its parts.
Yes,
like, if you really look at it, there's not a single original thing about this movie. You know, there's guns and car chases and cops and bad guys and boobs. We can't forget boobs. It was the 80s.
Well, it was the 80s, yeah. And smoking.
Yeah, there's smoking. Like, even though like there's nothing really original here, it's super entertaining. Like, I really, really enjoyed watching this movie again. I thought it was great.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it a lot. Again, I've seen it probably in the last 5 years or more. I've probably seen it a dozen times, but it's been a while. And part of the reason I think I hadn't rewatched it more recently was the whole Mel Gibson of it all.
Yeah.
But watching it again, you really realize, like, there's a reason this movie was a hit and why they made sequels and why it made Mel Gibson famous. Like, there's a lot to like about this movie once you get past the Mel Gibson of it all.
I think the direction is great. The action is great. And especially, I think the casting was great in this movie. I feel like the casting needed to be great in this movie because there's so much going on and there's so much action that I think lesser actors could kind of get lost in the shuffle here. Yeah. But I think the whole cast, top to bottom, was just perfect. So I really enjoyed
strong
this
casting. Yeah. No.
Do you want to give it a rating out of 10? What do you
I would say I'm going to be probably between a 7.5 and an 8. I would probably say an 8. It was pretty strong.
Wow. Very good.
It holds up pretty well.
Yeah, that's good. I'll give it a 7. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I thought it was quite good too.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's entertaining. It's worth a rewatch, and it's good. I mean, it is what it is. It's in the best possible ways.
All right. Well, so wrapping up the movie, it's time now.
Fun with Caveman.
All right, this was my movie that I picked, so it's over to you, Derek. What trivia or what fun do you want to have with me this week?
All right. So, as I mentioned a few times already,
Yes.
this movie was quite successful, and they made a bunch of sequels. In fact, there are exactly four Lethal Weapon movies. So I'm going to ask you some trivia about other series that have had exactly 4 movies. No more, no less. I'm not going to ask you like how many Marvel superheroes movies were there. Oh, there's been 30 something. 4. The answer is 4. How many movies are in these series? I'm going to give you a very tongue-in-cheek, loose description of the series, and all I need you to do is tell me the name of the series. If you can name off some of the movies, the sequels and stuff, great. Then, as a bonus question for each series, I want you to tell me how many years there was between the first one and the last one.
Oh, God.
That's just bonus prizes. Okay? I got 10 movies, 10 movie franchises here, and we'll see how you do. Right. Most of these are pretty recognizable franchises, even if you maybe haven't seen them before or seen all of them. I think you'll get many of them.
Okay.
All right. You ready?
So these are all movie series with 4 installments.
4 installments.
Okay.
All right. Okay. You ready?
Yep.
Let me see. Where do we want to start? Let's start with a nice, easy one. Okay. And let me finish the whole question, because some of them you may know right away, but let me finish the whole question before you jump in.
Ahead.
Okay. 4 movies. Okay. Despite their actual danger and ferocity, the villain of this story is only responsible for 1 fatality every 2 years. What series am I talking about?
I thought it might be Halloween, but there's been so many. I don't know.
Jaws.
1 fatality every 2 years?
I looked it up. Average sharks kill only 1 person every 2 years. Despite
I thought of Jaws when you mentioned that, but I was thinking but Jaws, the shark killed like 5 people in the first movie alone.
Well, that's what I said. Despite what the movies would have you believe, in real life, there we go. Okay. So, bonus question for you then. How many years difference between the first Jaws movie and the last Jaws movie?
Well, the first one came out in 1975, and Jaws 4 would have came out in 1985. I'll say 10 years.
Close. 12 years. Jaws the Revenge, the 4th movie, came out in 87.
87. Oh, okay.
All right. So you got past that one. All right. The next one. This outsider and the $1 Million Baby both learned that wax off is not actually slang for masturbation in this martial arts series.
It would be... Oh, let me just think about that for a second. That would be The Karate Kid.
Yes. So, bonus points. How many years between the first Karate Kid movie and the last Karate Kid movie?
Oh, man, that's a tough one, because the first one I know came out in 1984, and I've been kind of being consistent with this, so I'm going to go ahead and say the next one is in 1994. I'll say 10 years.
You're exactly right. 10 years. Nice. Nicely done. The last one was called The Next Karate Kid.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was the one with Hilary Swank was the girl. Right?
The $1 Million Baby herself. Yeah. All right. An adventurous teacher verifies the existence of magic, God, and aliens in this series.
Is it the Indiana Jones series?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yes.
All right.
Nice.
So, how many years between the first and last Indiana Jones movies?
Okay, so the first one came out in 1981, Raiders of the Lost Ark,
did.
Obviously.
Raiders of the Lost Ark, yep.
I did not watch the 4th one, but it would have came out in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. I'll say 2005. So that's what I'll go with.
Nope. It came out in 2008. The last one, Indiana Jones: The Kingdom of Crystal Skull, 27 years in between the first one and the last one.
No, okay.
And I do believe they are in the process of making a 5th one, but it hasn't come out yet.
I heard that. That's just stupid. Okay.
All right. Here we go. This one a little newer for you here. Oh. So, Saturday Night Live alums and their friends lend their voices to classic monsters such as the Invisible Man, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and Dracula in this cartoon series about the hospitality industry.
Is it Hotel Transylvania?
Yes, yes, it is.
I only know that because my kids watch it, and I don't know how many years. I will say the first one came out in 2011, and the last one came out in 2021. So I'll go with 10 years again.
You're right with 10 years, but you were off by 1 year on both. It was 2012 for the first and 2022 for the last one. Yeah, 10 years.
Not bad.
Nicely done. Got them both. All right. Let's move on to this one.
Having young kids pays off sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Trivia.
Okay.
I don't watch those movies, so.
All right, here we go. Aging action stars, well past their prime, lean into nostalgia as they cash in for one less paycheck, or two, or three, or four.
It's not the Expendables, is it?
It is absolutely the Expendables.
That's a total guess. I couldn't tell you the difference. I know they made multiple of these.
They made four. They made exactly four.
I didn't. You're teaching me something that they did 4. I thought they did like 2 of these or something. I don't know. So I don't know how many years.
It was 13 years. The first one came out in 2010, and the fourth one, although it hasn't been released yet, is slated for early release in 2023. So nicely done. You got both of those.
Nice. Checks.
Or no, you didn't get the years, but you got the other one. Okay. You're going to love this one. I'm going to save that one because I like that one. Okay, so here we go. We wish the protagonists of this series could use their mind-erasing gadgets on us after we were forced to sit through the 3rd and 4th installment of this series based on a comic book.
Was it Men in Black?
Yes, it was.
I only got that because of the racing thing. Yep. Because they did one just recently, a couple years ago.
Yes, they did.
The first one was Men in Black, was like 97, if I remember correctly.
It exactly was 97. You're correct.
And the most recent one was a couple of years ago, so I'll go with 2020.
You're off by a year. It came out in 2019, so it's 22 years between them. Close, though. Close.
Not bad.
Nice. All right. How many we got left here? I got 4 left. Okay. Originally conceived as a trilogy, the directors revisited their most successful franchise for a 4th-part follow-up that actually worked. Unfortunately, no one can be told exactly what Part 4 is about, but taking a red pill will help.
It's got to be The Matrix, right?
It is absolutely The Matrix.
I know that because it's like Yancey's favorite, movie ever. I know they did like 3 of them. The first one was good. The next 2 were crappy, and then they made another one recently. So you want me? I know the first one was 1999.
Yep.
Most recent one, I don't know. I'll say 2020 again.
Again, off by 1 year. It's 2021, The Matrix Resurrections. So 22 years between the first one and the last one. Wow. You got the main. You didn't get the bonus points, but you got the other one. Mm-hmm. All right. This was a little older. This might actually fall into your wheelhouse. This blaxploitation film franchise features the character Youngblood. No, not the hockey player, but a cocaine dealer who is trying to quit the underworld drug business.
Ooh, that's a good one. I can't think of it, though. I don't know.
It's the Superfly franchise.
Oh, Superfly. I only thought they made 1 of those.
They made 4 of them. Although I suspect the last one is probably a remake or a reimagining or a next generation, but according to my homework, it's what they did. So how many years do you think between the original Superfly and the latest
The only
iteration?
one I can think of was like early 70s, so I wouldn't be able to tell you what the other ones were. I have no idea.
All right. Superfly came out in 72, Superfly TNT 73, and then the return of Superfly in 1990, and then I assume as a remake, Superfly in 2018. 46 years from start to finish.
Does a remake count as like a 4th installment?
Again, I don't know if it's a remake or just like a next generation sequel. There was a handful of movies that were sort of like that. So, All right. Second to last one. This one's, I will accept 2 completely different franchises because they both fit the clue.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. This superhero series started strong with a credible director behind the camera for the first 2 films, only to see the franchise slip and fall to its death in parts 3 and 4.
Ooh, would it be Superman?
Superman is one of the correct answers.
Okay.
How many years between the first and last Superman movie?
Okay, the first one came out in 1978, if I remember correctly. And the fourth one, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, would have came out in 89?
Nope, you're close. 87. So it was 9 years from start to finish for Superman.
Wow.
There was another film franchise that also fits the description. Got any guesses?
Would it be Spider-Man?
Nope, it would not. But I would have
it?
accepted Batman, the Tim Burton, Joel Schumacher Batman.
Yes,
There were four: Batman, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, and Batman and Robin. The first one came out in 89. The last one came out in 97, which was 8 years from start to finish. So, all right, last one.
Okay.
And you got to wait for me to finish reading the whole question because I know you're gonna know this. Despite part one being terrible, this film franchise about the hijinks of camp counselors and the campers lived on for 4 installments, each worse than the one that came before it. But part one is still one of Chris's all-time favorite films.
Okay, so this is where you're throwing me for a loop because you're saying the first one was no good and the first one was fantastic. And I think it's Meatballs.
It is Meatballs.
Yeah, the first one was not awful. It was great. And it came out in 1979.
It did.
Recently, I mentioned that I've never watched any of these sequels. But Meatballs Part 2, I watched a bit recently. I put it on. I was like, I wasn't feeling good there in the summer. And so I'm like laying around. I put the movie on. I thought, I got to finally watch Meatballs Part 2. I had to turn it off. It was garbage. And then Meatballs 4, if I remember correctly, it had like, what's that guy's name from, he was in Can't Buy Me Love and...
Patrick Dempsey.
And it was like...
I've actually seen that one. It is so bad.
So awful. Like just garbage. But it wasn't a huge difference in time. So I want to say that they wrapped it up by like early 90s. So I'll say like by 91, the fourth one was.
Oh, so close. 92. So it was 13 years. Yeah. So it was Meatballs, 1979, Meatballs Part 2 in 84, Meatballs 3 Summer Job in 1986, and then Meatballs 4, 1992. So you did very well on those. You went 8 out of 10 on the questions, and you got about half of the bonus ones. You were pretty close. You knew when all of them started. You just got a couple of the last ones wrong.
Of course, I'm going to know when all of them start because that's
of course. Yeah. Nice.
So obviously this time, Derek, it was over me to pick, a movie for our draft here and watch. So that means next time it's your turn to pick a movie from 1987. So Derek, what movie would you like me to go back and watch? And then we'll come back and talk about from 1987.
So I was all set to have you watch Beverly Hills Cop Part 2, which I love, and I've seen it, 20 times or more, and I think it's great. But I was just listening to one of our older episodes. I think it was one of the greatest hits episodes, and we were talking about like movies we hadn't seen, and you were talking about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, or maybe it was in our 87 draft. You were talking about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and I kept saying, I've never seen it. I mentioned that in our draft as my personal pick. Yeah. And so I have not seen it, but I actually have it on my PVR right now. And as it turns out, it was on TV today on, I want to say AMC, like back to back. They just kept showing it over and over again. So having never seen it before, I got to think it takes place around Thanksgiving, which is why it's been on TV this week because it's American Thanksgiving. So you know what? Normally I would have you watch a movie that I love.
Something that you're really familiar with.
I'd rather do a movie I've never ever seen before. Cool. So let's do that. Let's do Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. All right. I've never seen it. I know you've seen it before. Let's come back and talk about it next week. I've heard great things about it. I remember, not too vividly. I remember the trailer, so I know a couple of the scenes, a couple of the gags, but 2-minute trailer does not explain a 2-hour movie. So I'm looking forward to this. I like Steve Martin. I like John Candy. Honestly, I don't know who else is in it. We'll come back next week and talk all about it.
No, it really is. It's just that it's the two of them, but Edie McClurg has a really memorable scene in it too. And I like Steve Martin as well. And I love John Candy. As I always mentioned to you, John Candy always had a bit of an edge to him. But in this one, this was one movie where I felt that he could make you laugh and also break your heart. In almost even in the same scene. I think you're going to like this. I think you're going to like that movie a lot. It'll be interesting. We'll come back next time. We'll watch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and we'll review it. But until then, this is Chris McBride on behalf of myself and Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.